So I talked to two members of Calvary Church this past week who are firmly on opposite sides of each other for this here election that we have going on in the United States this week. One of them said to me, Angie, I'm just so afraid of what our country will be like if Donald Trump wins the election. And a little bit later in the afternoon on another phone call, the other one said to me, Angie, I am just so afraid of what our country is going to be like if Joe Biden wins this election. And I thought about this, and I thought about what was behind both of their statements, what was leading them up to making these statements to me on the phone. And I think it was fear. I think they both had a lot of fear. There is just so much fear going around in our country right now. And fear, it tends to develop and grow during times of uncertainty. I mean, think about it. When we feel secure in our path, secure in what's coming ahead, when we have a vision of what is forward, we usually aren't afraid. But when the path feels dark and uncertain and out of control, really, if we're honest, I mean, we only get one vote, but even so, fear, it just creeps its way in when we don't know what is coming ahead. When I was a kid, my fears seemed very limited. They seemed limited to things like monsters under my bed and spiders and darkness, all those uncertainties around me. But as I've grown, just like you've grown, the fears, they seem to be more about what is uncertain. And these fears, they can become easily overwhelming. It was a couple of years ago when I took a group of students to the Boundary Waters canoe area up in northern Minnesota. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the Boundary Waters is this designated wilderness area, and you go canoeing out there and you paddle from lake to lake, really. And I had just finished this week-long camping trip with a group that I had brought up from my church. And we were staying at this Lutheran camp for the final night, this Lutheran camp that is called Wilderness Canoe Base. Now, Wilderness Canoe Base itself is developed from two different islands. They have their base on one island and then another island, and then there's a bridge connecting the two. One island has electricity, and our group went to that island that has electricity to kind of regroup after we'd been out in the wilderness all week and to kind of have dinner and then make some phone calls to our families and our loved ones. And so I hadn't talked to my kids in over a week, so I went and I made a phone call. And as I was on the phone with my kids, our group decided that it was time for them to go back to where we were camping on the other island. And so I just sort of waved them on ahead, and I said, go ahead without me. I'll finish up my phone call, and I'll catch up with you. But after I finished up my phone call, I went outside and I realized that I had left my flashlight in someone else's bag. And now it was completely dark outside in the wilderness. And the only way for me to get to from where I was to where my group was this path in the darkness, in the wilderness, actually. And I was without a light. The building that I was in had one porch light, but as I started walking down this path, I realized very quickly that I was going to be covered in complete darkness, and I was uncertain of where to go, and I'll be honest, I was afraid. You see, at first, my eyes were used to seeing the light from the porch. At first, my eyes, they had a hard time adjusting to this darkness. It was so dark. And I started to hit my foot on rocks, and I hit my hand on a tree, and I stumbled down a path, and I was sort of just feeling my way around, slow and clumsily and painful. But I knew how far it was to get back to my group, walking downhill and just bumping through down the path. And I'll admit, while walking down this path, while bumping and bruising my way around, fear started to take over me. And my mind started racing in the what-ifs that happen with fear. And they started creeping their way into my mind. Oh my gosh, what if I fall out here and break my leg and no one can hear me if I cry because of how far away they are? Or what if a bear comes and wants to attack me? Or what if I don't find my group, if I end up in the wrong path and I just stay out there lost on these islands until morning? What if? What if? You see, fear, it creeps in when we can't see what's ahead of us. And this year has been full of fear, hasn't it? Fear of scarcity, fear of COVID, fear of our economy taking a hit, fear of losing our jobs, fear of global warming and its impact with fires, fear of dying, fear of protests, fear of division, just so much fear This fear, this dealing with what's unknown, it drives us to want to latch onto things that we think might soothe our existential dread. When we're uncertain, we want to latch onto things so that they can try and make us feel certain. And as I walked farther and farther away into the darkness, away from the dining hall's one little light, something amazing started to happen. My eyes, they just started to adjust to the darkness. And well, at that point, the darkness, it didn't seem like darkness at all. All of a sudden, my eyes found their way to see the moon and the stars and the light coming up from the lakes to make everything kind of all of a sudden visible. My fear melted away, and I could start to see with perspective, and I could see that in this wilderness and in this darkness, there was great, great beauty. Good news, long story short, I made it back to my group and I didn't die in the wilderness. But my fears were just that. They were just fears. In the book of Hebrews in the Bible, we hear the words of God, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." So we say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid, because what can mortals do to me?" So friends, what do you fear today? What darkness do you feel like you're walking into? And what are the what ifs that you're wrestling with today as we move through this election week? While our country's path, it seems really uncertain this week, we can be certain of some things. We can be certain that we have a God that brings light to the darkness, that we have a God who comforts us, and a God who tells us not to fear, and a God who has got us and will always be with us. So join us this week. We're going to be talking about fear in uncertain times and how do we navigate this fear and what God has to say about it. If you know someone who could use this message today or this week at all, somebody who's struggling with the anxiety of the fear that is all around and needs to hear something good on the internet, would you do me a favor and go ahead and share this onto your own Facebook and also continue to invite them. If you're joining us on YouTube, would you go ahead and hit subscribe, and then you can get daily updates that are going to be from Pastor Hans and Maddie and I talking about this fear. And if you're joining us on cable access, would you invite a friend to join you tomorrow? And so we'll say this week, hopefully with confidence, just like the letter to the Hebrews, "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid."
Higher than the mountains that I face, stronger than the power of the grave, constant in the trial and the change, one thing remains, one thing remains. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Yeah, your love, because on and on and on and on it goes. Yes, it overwhelms and satisfies my soul, and I never ever have to be afraid. This one thing remains. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Yeah, love, you love, you love, you love.